Hello and welcome to Safety Revolution, a Veeva podcast exploring the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm David Kološić, a director of safety strategy, and today I'm excited to host Marius Mortensen, a principal architect at Veeva. We'll talk about the origins of safety, how we build the system, where we are today and where we're going tomorrow. Marius, welcome to the podcast. It's exciting to have you going back to the origins and talking a little bit about the future. How are you today?
I'm fantastic, David. Thanks for inviting me for this. This is going to be super fun.
Yeah, I can't wait. I've always been curious about how we started and who else to talk about this than you.
Just a little bit about me to start off with. So Marius Mortensen, I've been with Veeva now almost 10 years, and I've been with safety since pretty much its inception. It was announced and then I jumped on there. So first couple years was a platform and then onward to safety. That's been my focus ever since.
Great. So you've been at Veeva building the platform, so you know the architecture and how the platform runs. But then back in 2018, we decided to actually go ahead and we wrote the first line of code. And long time since then, many things have changed. But it's really interesting to maybe start with these origins. Like, why did we decide to go into safety and why was the timing right?
Clinical had been going on the Vault platform, and we had quality and RIM in 2015. So there's a bunch of things happening as well. CRM was over 10 years old at that point. Now it's a good opportunity. We've seen the clinical, we've seen the R&D, we've seen the post-marketing space. Now we have this conjoinment of the stars to kind of do it.
Was the initial strategy to just build a safety database and see how that goes and then eventually expand, or was the initial strategy a little bit broader?
So I think, when you try to approach it, there's a lot of ideas. Even at the announcement when we first talked about it, there's several apps announced, but the focus was going to be the safety database. You got to take those challenging problems first because that's the core foundation. But there was the vision of a broader application suite, because when we looked at the safety ecosystem, it was vast and there was a multitude of different solutions in it. So not a single thing, but an ecosystem around it. And when we looked at that, we're like, there are ways to simplify that ecosystem. So that platform, that safety platform, and broadening out to those different apps, that was the vision. But the core of that was the safety data, and that would be the foundation.
Building the foundation first, because then all of the other processes actually rely on that data foundation. So if you have that solved, then building things on top is going to be much easier, right?
We had some really good wind because we were building on top of the Vault platform. So we didn't have to do the basics, which was nice. But that's where, we focused on the safety elements. We worked with customers early as well. So, focusing on the most challenging stuff is really important for building a strong application.
You mentioned platform as the accelerator, right? So the safety is built on the Vault platform, same as the RIM, clinical, medical, etc. How did this give us the wind? What were the types of things we didn't have to think when building the safety system that was already solved by the platform?
We had a platform that was being used by other applications. So they had workflows and a lot of configuration in there, which allowed us not to have to worry about those things. And we could actually focus on the safety elements. And we knew how to do 3 validated releases a year. And we started building using those 3 releases and knowing that that was our ultimate destination, which is a radical departure. If you think about it from where PV was, there would be like every 5 years, a huge upgrade project instead of continuous improvements. So we had to think about how that would also impact them. But luckily, there were a lot of learnings that we already had from our other areas in R&D, which really helped. And they had made the platform better and better. So when we started, instead of worrying about the basics, we were worried about actual safety specifics. How do we do end-to-end case processing? How are we going to do the gateways? How are we going to make those configurable? How are we going to work with the agencies and make sure the health authorities to make sure that we can do submissions? How are we going to make a rules system work, right? All those key components, that was our focus. How are we going to make Medrib work really well? So instead of, how does a workflow work? Didn't have to worry about that. So we got this amazing, robust system, and then we were able to build on top of that. So, it's standing on the shoulders of giants. You look a little bit further, I think is the quote.
You also mentioned a huge mindset shift from these huge 3 to 5 year upgrade projects to something that's slightly different, right? 3 releases per year. So from the perspective of a PV person or PV system admin who's in the mindset of I'm going to do a project every 5 years to the mindset of, hearing the first time, well, actually, now you're doing it 3 times per year. Was that giving us a challenge, or what were some of these initial conversations that we were having?
There's always resistance to change, but ultimately, people start to go, okay, there's benefit in this. And the regulations started changing much more rapidly too. From 2012 onward, there is a vast series of adoptions and changes. Some of them voluntary, but a lot of mandatory dates in there as well. The EMA was changing to EDBR3. That was a big push from 2018 to 2022, some big rollouts there. The FDA, their VAERS was rolling out, their combination products. There's all these changes that were happening even up until now. And I think other agencies around the world, or health authorities, have also now adopted these ICH standards. And as a result, what happens is you get more different wrinkles in that, causing, again, trying to keep up with those changes. And technology, right? Technology has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And to keep up with that, you have to keep moving. The other part is the strategy, which we do. We don't do auto-ons for everything. We don't try to swarm them, but we do nudge them gently in those right directions and make it so that they can keep compliant.
I think that's a good way to think about it, because as I said, they don't have to think about big upgrade projects or potentially third-party solutions to solve some of the new regulations. It's actually solved by our product, and they can do it ahead of time as well. Looking back, so first go lives, right? It took us about 15 months between starting development to first go lives. What were some of the initial challenges that we were hearing from the industry that we were really planning to solve? What some of the interesting stories of the early days?
The heads of the industry, they had a good read on what was going on. However, there was also some minutiae stuff that was happening that they weren't necessarily aware of, the workarounds and things like that, and how everything was really hanging on by a thread out there. A single upgrade of the other systems, all those ecosystem around could collapse because it's all siloed. You have these mini point solutions that certain individuals are the only people within the organization who know how this latch-on solution works. And that's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure points for an organization, should change happen. And I think, that siloed aspect of how those applications were built even, it's like Microsoft Word and Excel. They became a suite of things, but they weren't originally from that. And it took a long time, and some would even argue now that they're not as integrated as one would like. So when you're looking at that, that's the same thing that safety had, except for it also had all these add-ons around it. You'd have to go buy your gateway. You'd have to go and set up potentially some other intake solutions, local affiliates, run a separate database for Japan. All of these things were happening. And then there was all these other point solutions for things that just weren't configurable within a system because it was built as a database to store data, right? And then you'd have your signaling systems, which again, you'd ship that out through an ETL, and then you'd have all those IT problems of shipping that out, making sure the data is consistent. How many times do you spend reconciling all these data points? So across that, all these handoffs, that was the big challenge out there.
Two sides of the coin. One is IT that has this behemoth of applications which are somehow stitched together, have to be maintained, have to make sure the integrations don't break.
And make sure they're validated.
Valid all time, right? Being able to justify that in front of inspections. But then on the other side, which is very interesting, something that we still do today is kind of a day in a life, right? Sitting with the case processors or with the end users and hearing their perspectives, because in the end, they are the ones who are using it on a daily basis, and we want to make them as efficient as possible, but also happy at the same time, right? So they have a tool that they actually like to use. So the first go lives were actually small organizations, right? Something that was, let's say, slightly less risky organizations where we could kind of learn as we go. But quite quickly, we decided to go with a top 10, right? So it was 15 months to go live with the first small organizations, a lot of learnings there. But then we decided to just go all the way up and solve the challenges that we didn't anticipate.
When you are going out, early adopters are so important, and the mindset there, someone who's willing to take that risk, because there is risk in anything, right? People that were looking to change because they were so frustrated with what was going on, that really helped us. And I think, that was our first volley of customers. They just really wanted to be part of the process to influence that next generation of change. And then we found a top 10 who was so fed up with the status quo that they were very much willing to take that risk and partner with us to bring forward a new vision. And I think that was fundamental, to find an early adopter. And it was always, we were looking for that right, like when you're launching a product, you want to find the right partner, because then you can actually drive things forward. Now, that became a bit of a North Star, but we didn't want to just build a single customer's solution. So we wanted to have a broader view. And that's been the approach.
So not just trying to rebuild the problems and not kind of dragging along the baggage that's coming from the history for a good reason, right? Because the technology was what it was back then, but really looking at the challenges of today, technologies of today, and finding the way of how to solve these challenges with the...
Well, if you're building a safety system in 2018, right, you can be inspired by the past, but you got to look to the future. And the great part was the regulations had changed. There was updates. We were able to build to the latest regulations, which, by the way, was also a challenge at the time because not every agency was on the latest regulations. In fact, like the FDA is just now getting to the latest EDB standard in 2026 as their mandatory date. But we were able to get rid of the baggage and build towards the future and really look holistically on how do you do a worldwide system? How do you get that in one system rather than two? Because a handoff to another system and having a system specifically for Japan where potentially the data gets out of sync and now you need to reconcile. If you had to do that for every destination that decides to go and do something slightly different, that's untenable.
But that's a huge challenge, right? Because we have these specific regions with regional requirements, and trying to build all of these requirements into one single platform is something that is not easy to do, right? But you also, we talked about the Vault platform being the foundation, right? So it gives us that unified data model, which allows us to build all of these processes within case processing, but also outside. And it also allows us to connect across other domains, because as we know, safety is not in a silo. It depends on so many other domains as well. What type of benefits does the platform approach give us that the status quo, old school, independent solutions wouldn't give you?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So all of the other Veeva applications are built on that same platform. So they have similar DNA. And when you know how to configure one thing in one, you know how to do it in another, which is very helpful. But more importantly, we really did have an advantage coming later to the game because we had seen how they'd build out their data models, and that helped us influence what we would do, which later was really great because when connections started to become a thing, reconciling the data models, that's something that safety had done early. And we had looked at how might we in the future integrate with our RIM systems for products? How would we do it for quality, potentially for complaints? How would we do things for, medical inquiries and get things coming through that, and clinical? Those were really important conversations that we had at the beginning, but we didn't really have the idea of how we would connect it. But we knew it was important to have that symmetry there, because at some point it makes sense to make them work together, because that allows you to realize a collaboration that was not ever possible before, where it was a handoff through email and things like that. But even just being in the cloud allowed us to change how people were potentially approaching problems, because on-prem, you have to worry about granting people security or VPN access to a server. We didn't have to worry about that. We were able to go, okay, well, there's a certain set of users that you want to have access to this. You have a CRO, bring them in, restrict their security, and they can do the work for you in system, and you can work, in a collaborative way. So it really changes that paradigm, and the platform and all the surrounding systems allows you just to expand how you do different things, right? And then even within the suite, when we were building out other applications, we're looking at how do we do things like take a literature case that's being reviewed in safety docs and bring that into safety in a seamless way, right? How do you bring a safety letter from safety and distribute out to SiteVault? Those are really they're critical things for your safety organization. But when you have that ecosystem of tools around you, you want to make sure you can support it. Now, we understand that not everyone can have every single thing in Veeva. When they do, that's great. But those integration points exist also for insert tool X into any one of them so that you can actually keep doing that too. So that integration, that, I always say that safety is an O positive or a universal receiver.
Okay, so multiple benefits, right? One benefit is it's a cloud, multi-tenant cloud system, meaning that it's anyone, you can access it from anywhere, right? Of course, you would have security set up so the right people can see the right things at the right moment. But this allows you, first of all, well, the global is in the system, the affiliates can be in the system, your partners or your CROs can be in the system. They can do their work, but you, as the marketing authorization holder, sponsor, you have a full oversight and control around your processes. The second thing you mentioned is it truly enables to manage your processes end to end. And this end to end is not only within the constraints of a safety system, it's also within the constraints of different intake channels, whether it's coming from the medical affairs department, whether it's coming from the clinical teams. So being able to connect the data flow from one end to the other and back, if necessary, makes a huge difference, right? You mentioned that a big part of our strategy is the Veeva connections, right? So we are connecting safety with medical, with clinical, with regulatory, etc. In an easy way, how would you describe what's the difference between a Veeva connection and the integration with third-party systems?
So typically with any integration, and the EDBR3 standard and R2 standard was all built on data exchange principles, right? But it's like a lossy format, right? You will have to make compromises on the data you're exchanging, or you'll have to spend more time and money on building out what's missing. Right? And that goes for any integration. You could choose, okay, we're going to exchange EDBR3s, that's our agreement, but I also want a myriad of additional data. So we agreed on how that exchanged. Now you need to be able to interpret that and bring that into the system. So I think the difference is when you're integrating within the Veeva ecosystem, it's apples to apples in many ways. Obviously, there's different use cases and different user groups and people are doing different roles, but you have the data mapping already done to say this is how these things map. And this is the data you can get from this system and bring it across. Whereas for an integration, you might start with a core principle, and then you may spend a lot more time enriching that data, either through manual processes, which can be problematic, like a lot of integrations. You get over the E to B and then you go into the old system and start rekeying in the additional data.
Yeah, and also I think the value of what we're trying to achieve with connections is that we're not only focusing on the technical aspects, we're not only focusing on how we're going to exchange the data and documents, we're actually thinking about specific business processes and how we're going to enable those, right? So it makes it, it's not just about the technicalities, it's actually how can we enable operational efficiency across the process.
And I think that's a good point too. It's not just about the data mappings. It's we actually select specific use cases and go, this is the problem we're trying to solve. Safety letters is a very specific use case. Maintaining your study library, maintaining your product library, having an intake of your meta inquiries. The exchange for quality, you're both getting things from quality and back. You're getting your outcomes from an investigation back to safety, which may cause a follow-up or be able to finish your case. There's adverse event information going both directions in that. There's specific use cases in that. And then even, more broad kind of looking into the future, there's things where, you do an aggregate report or periodic report, you're doing that authoring. There's a lot of work that's done by the safety team and the safety writers, but then it's handed over to the regulatory team. And that's where you get just really cool stuff because now you can see cross-domain workflows where those organizations were very siloed, where the handoff becomes a little bit easier between them. And that's where connections can really do some amazing things beyond what they're already doing. I mean, the data exchange stuff for adverse events is awesome, but imagine a world where Signal detects a new adverse event, right? That comes in, an adverse event watch list gets set up, it's monitored. Over time, it's determined that there should be, risk mitigation plan comes up and it needs to update a label. That goes over to regulatory. Regulatory reviews it as structured data. It becomes an SPL and then comes back into safety and updates the data sheets. That's the kind of really cool stuff that connections can do.
Regulations are changing, they're evolving. More and more authorities are now adopting the E2B standard. Organizations are growing, meaning they're reaching more patients, meaning that there's going to be more adverse events reported, so the volume of work is going up. So one of the big topics as well is operational efficiency. How can we do more with less? And this is also, I mean, the AI is a paradigm shift, right? So we have to address the elephant in the room. It is there to stay, it will provide value, but maybe to take a step back, where do you see this going? Like, on one hand, we have the foundation, which we can trust. We have the high quality data across the platform. On top, we can start building automations, and then of course there are use cases for AI. So what is your view on the current movement on the AI, and also like the difference between what we should automate and what are the actual real world use case of AI?
The growth of case volumes and the complexity around them is, I think, one of the big drivers here, right? Like, even a company that's bringing their product to more markets, right? Now they have different distribution channels and submission requirements that they need to deal with. If they're dealing with more complex therapies, and, you know, combination products are much more complex. How they're registered around the world, they can be drugs in one country, a device in another, a combination in another. It gets very complex keeping on top of all of those things to do that. So as you're looking at, I guess, efficiency and driving that across the board, right? Your trade-off is speed and quality, right? You have more cumbersome data entry that you're doing because you have to do that. That's what the regulatory teams are demanding. That's what the health authorities need, right? You're given sparse amounts of data potentially from your reporters. You're not necessarily given the whole thing. So you have incomplete data that you're actually trying to get to its level that is sufficient to go, I have what I have, you know, what I can do, and then bring that forward. As we're automating, there's things that are natural, like the structured data exchange with partners, right? From these different connections, those are things that are candidates for automation that you can kind of do. And we focused on that initially, to going, how do we actually, you know, automate from end to end as much as we can? So whether it's the intake through ingestion, whether it's processing and autofilling certain things, sending out questionnaires is a very important thing to get the additional data that's missing. And then as much as you can to promote and submit without as much intervention as needed, like all those rules that are executing. Those are things that I think are working well, where I see AI really coming in and helping. And, you know, I think in 5 years, we'll be talking about AI in a completely different way. 5 years ago, we were talking about it in a completely different way as well, right? Like when we first started looking into some of the AI, what we saw was it did a very junior level of data entry. So it'd bring it in. That was great. All the data came in, but it wasn't really contextualized, which meant it just shifted the burden to the QC. And that's not a great way of doing things. And it was kind of disconnected from how it came in. And building trust was such an important thing. So we focused on certain things like Medra, auto-coding, things like that, that were, you know, tied to synonyms, but also some variations, typo detection, things like that, where we could build trust in these automations. I think we have skyrocketed forward in terms of what AI can do now from context and the power of that. So I think that is changing the paradigm. I think structured data is always going to be a preference in the industry because you can do more with that, especially from trusted sources. But AI is going to change how we do intake. It already is, right? But getting that experience right to build trust and keeping people in the loop where they need to be, that's the key innovations. Being able to have your quality sampling so that you can go, I want to sample this every time, but sometimes I'll do a heavy review so I can see a full core sample to make sure that the thing is performing as expected, or for complex cases, I want to do this. And then most of the time I'm going to do light reviews to make sure that things are working within relative tolerances. And finding those depths is super important to building out trust. And that's the thing. We have to be able to trust that AI is going to do it consistently, and isn't because Wednesday it decides it's going to write a narrative completely different, or it's depressed, right? Those are the things that we need to look at when we're doing AI. And probably the biggest challenges when it comes to adopting AI is building out that trust and a framework so that AIs tend to make up things when they don't know. it's really good in safety to raise your hand and say, I need help. And that, I think, is the fundamental difference there, right? We need our automation to know when it doesn't know something and ask for help, or help give us insights where there might be problems.
It is going to take a while. I think we'll have a few early adopters who will have to, like you said, on the top 10 pharma that was like, yes, we are ready to go from legacy to a platform. I think we'll have the same with the AI organizations that are willing to take a little bit more risk under control, of course, within the confidence intervals. But I think what I like about our strategy is that we rely the first layer is the platform, is the single foundation of your data that you can trust. The second layer is automate whatever you can automate, right? Structure the unstructured, rely on that. And then on top, we're building some of specific business use cases for AI where automation cannot go to that level, right? So if you had a crystal ball, you could see in the next 5 years, 2030, what do you think will be the most impactful innovation that will change or shape PV? So to ask differently, what is going to be today's challenge that will be a solved problem in 2030?
A solved problem. So I think the fragmentation will be gone. I think we'll be starting to getting to a safety golden age in 2030. So closing in on digital safety, I don't think we're ever going to get away from the analog, but I think we're going to see that digital golden age where we have high quality data. It is the missing pieces. At least we know where they are and we're trying to piece them in. And ultimately that's going to help with the risk benefit and making sure that products are safe, right? And I think that safety teams are going to move from worrying about the minutia of efficiency and start worrying about the science of safety.
And go more towards predictive
Yeah.
analysis of benefit risk, as you said, right? Helping the patients, having better information.
Yeah.
So to end this podcast, final question, if your PV system was a superhero, who would it be?
Heroes are important, aren't they? They reflect who we want to be. And I think for me, I would say, and it's going to sound weird, the doctor from Doctor Who. Okay. So not your traditional hero. And he travels through space and time, going from place to place, encounters complex problems, and does his very best to try and solve them against immense odds and everything else. And I think one of the writers characterized it as he wasn't given a gun, he was given a screwdriver to fix things. He wasn't given an X-wing, he was given a call box so he could come and help. And he doesn't have superpowers, he has two hearts because he has compassion. And I think those kind of embody the Veeva spirit. And I think also what we're trying to do with safety, just make it better than we found it.
It's a beautiful analogy. With this, Marius, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
It was such a great conversation. I loved it.